Hello, everyone. Today I'll be presenting the political causes and consequences of unequal school funding in the United States. The quality of education a child receives in America is heavily shaped by the wealth of the neighborhood they live in, something deeply connected to political decisions and structures. Why this topic matters. Education is often described as the great equalizer, but in reality, it is one of the systems that most clearly reflects and reinforces economic inequality. Schools serving wealthy communities receive more funding, offer more opportunities, and produce stronger outcomes, while poorer districts often struggle to meet basic needs. These outcomes don't happen by accident, they are created and sustained by political choices involving taxation, local control, district boundaries, and the state and federal policy. Why school funding is a political issue. Funding rules are created by state lawmakers. Local taxes depend on political decisions about district boundaries. Federal programs like Title I rely on Congress, and political conflicts shape what reforms are possible. School funding isn't just about an education, it's shaped by political decisions at every level of government. How politics shapes education. Politics affects nearly every part of the K through 12 education, from curriculum debates to teacher protections to how resources are distributed. Political pressure influences all of that. School board and state leaders often argue a lot because of politics, and that not only affects the school's operation but also the budgets. Political debates often also overshadow the real issue, unequal resources. U.S. wealth inequality and the link to school funding. Across the United States, wealth inequality has grown a lot. In 2022, the richest families had about 71 times more wealth than the average family. This matters for schools because a community's wealth decides how much money it can raise through property taxes. So, wealthy areas can fund their schools more easily than low-income areas. In other words, the gaps we see in school funding are really part of the bigger wealth inequalities in our society. Additionally, on the slide, we have the distribution of family wealth chart. In 1983, you can see that the difference between the smallest percentile versus the biggest is way smaller between the gap in 2016. And these are the only charts I have right now, but I bet it has grown even more since then. When wealth inequality grows, school inequality grows with it. That's why funding gaps reflect the larger economic divide in our country. How U.S. school funding works. One of the largest political drivers of educational inequality is how we fund schools. The United States relies heavily on local property taxes to fund public education. This means wealthy districts raise more money with lower tax rates, and poor districts raise far less, even with higher tax rates. State and federal contributions vary widely. So, the core structure of American school funding distributes resources based off community wealth rather than the student need. Funding inequalities over time. These funding inequalities are not new. They've existed for decades and are deeply tied to the way cities have been politically organized. The richer areas don't want to share the money they get, and local communities want to control their own schools, which keeps funding unequal. These funding gaps are connected to race, income, and where people live. The impact on student outcome. Schools with more funding can hire more qualified teachers, reduce class sizes, upgrade technology, and offer advanced courses and extracurriculars. Meanwhile, underfunded schools often lack up-to-date textbooks, technology, art, counseling services, and sometimes even basic building maintenance. Funding affects graduation rates, college acceptance, academic performance, and lifetime earning potential. This shows that unequal funding directly reinforces class and wealth inequality across generations. Effects on high need students. Schools serving high-need students, especially low-income students, English learners, and students with disabilities, actually require more resources, not less. But under the current political system, these schools frequently receive the least amount of funding. As a result, they struggle to provide intervention services, mental health support, and individualized instruction. The political barriers to fixing funding. Local control stops states from making funding more equal. Wealthy districts don't want their money shared. Political disagreements slow down changes, and old funding rules don't match what the students actually need. Reforming the system requires political will, but many of the current political people benefit from how the school funding system works. Solutions proposed by experts. Through some of the research I've done, I've discovered that a lot of people recommend to give extra money to schools that need more help, have states share money better so schools don't have to rely so much on local taxes, increase federal funding and rules to support low-income schools, make school funding information clear and public, or to encourage communities and media to speak up for the fair funding. While each solution has a cost, the long-term benefits include higher achievement, reduced inequality, and more skilled workforce. The conclusion. Nope. To conclude, unequal school funding in the United States is not simply an education problem, it's a political problem. The structure of our funding system distributes resources based on community wealth rather than student need, which reinforces economic inequality. The research shows that money matters and that underfunded schools produce worse outcomes for students. If we want a society where opportunity is accessible, addressing school funding inequality must be a priority. I believe that every child should have an equal education that benefits them. These are the sources I used to do all of my research. Some of these references include Education Writers Association, GovFacts, American Consortium for Equity in Education, Learning Policy Institute, the Regulatory Review, and Urban Institute, which is also where I got my charts. Thank you so much for listening.